Today, we are going to explore the most horrifying pet attacks on their owners, from a camping trip where a cougar turned deadly to a cabin where a black bear struck back. It was March 15, 2016, in the dense rainforests of southeastern Cameroon, where towering mahogany trees stretched endlessly under the humid canopy. Hidden among thick jungle vegetation near the Sangha River, a converted logging camp sat isolated on 50 acres of abandoned concession land. The property had once housed a legitimate primate research station under proper government permits, but those days were long gone. Erica Winslow, a 52-year-old former wildlife photographer from America, had been operating this facility illegally for 3 years after her research permits expired. What she refused to surrender was Caesar, an 18-year-old western lowland gorilla weighing 375 pounds. Erica's demanding personality and entitled behavior had made her notorious among local officials and village chiefs. She constantly complained about wildlife inspections and refused to acknowledge that her research permits had expired. With no formal primate training, she relied entirely on YouTube videos and outdated zoo management methods she found online. Her social media posts showed increasingly erratic behavior as she attempted to discipline Caesar using intimidation tactics. The massive silverback had been displaying heightened territorial aggression for weeks, throwing branches at visitors and damaging the reinforced walls of his enclosure. Local villagers reported loud chest beating throughout the night, and Caesar had been refusing to enter his night shelter for the past 2 weeks, defying Erica's commands entirely. Cameroon's Ministry of Forestry and Wildlife had been building a case to seize the animals, but corruption and bureaucratic delays had prevented immediate action. Warning signs had been mounting for months as Caesar's behavior deteriorated under improper care. Western lowland gorillas are among the most powerful primates on Earth, with adult males possessing the strength of 10 humans. Their massive hands can exert crushing force, while their canine teeth can tear through flesh and bone with devastating efficiency. Despite their generally peaceful nature in the wild, captive gorillas under stress can become unpredictably violent, especially when confronted with perceived threats to their territory. Caesar had been showing classic signs of psychological distress from improper captivity conditions and inadequate social interaction. These magnificent creatures require specialized care that few private individuals can provide. On that fateful evening, Erica's frustration reached its breaking point. Caesar sat defiantly in the center of his enclosure, completely ignoring her increasingly loud commands to enter his night quarters. Determined to assert her dominance, she grabbed a makeshift electric prod, fashioned from old logging equipment, and unlocked the heavy gate to his 20 by 30-foot reinforced pen. This decision would prove fatal. As she stepped inside wielding the electrical device, Caesar's behavior shifted instantly from passive resistance to explosive aggression. The 375-pound silverback charged across the enclosure with terrifying speed. His massive body slammed into Erica's chest with the force of a small vehicle, launching her backward into the metal fence. The rusted metal cut deep into her back as Caesar's enormous hands grabbed her face, his thumbs pressing into her eye sockets with crushing pressure. Blood streamed down her cheeks as his fingernails tore at her skin. Caesar's powerful jaws clamped down on her left ear, severing it completely with a wet tearing sound. Erica's screams echoed across the empty rainforest as the gorilla grabbed her right hand, which still clutched the makeshift prod. His bite force of over 800 pounds per square inch crushed 3 fingers at the knuckles, severing them entirely. The enraged primate lifted Erica's body off the ground and shook her violently like a rag doll. Her shoulder dislocated with an audible pop as Caesar slammed her face first into the concrete floor. Her nose shattered on impact, creating a growing pool of blood beneath her head. The gorilla then grabbed her right leg with both massive hands and twisted with brutal force, snapping her femur bone. The jagged fracture tore through muscle and skin. Caesar positioned himself over Erica's prone form and brought both fists down on her ribcage with devastating impact. 6 ribs cracked simultaneously, the broken bones puncturing both lungs. Her breathing became shallow and labored as blood filled her chest cavity. For his final attack, Caesar grabbed Erica's head between his massive palms and squeezed with methodical pressure. Her skull cracked like an eggshell, and brain matter leaked onto the concrete floor. Her body went completely limp as life left her. The silverback sat calmly beside the lifeless body for the next 4 hours, occasionally grooming blood from his hands. Local villagers discovered the scene the following morning when the usual sounds of morning feeding never came. Cameroonian authorities launched an immediate investigation into the illegal operation, while wildlife officials worked to safely relocate Caesar to the Limba Wildlife Center. The incident sparked renewed debate about foreign nationals operating illegal wildlife facilities and the dangers posed to both operators and local communities. Government agents seized all remaining animals from the property within days. Erica's family released a statement expressing their grief while acknowledging the inherent dangers of keeping such powerful animals in captivity. Erica Winslow's story was a devastating reminder of how quickly primate fury can explode when desperation meets dominance. For Landon Price, it wasn't wilderness predators he should have feared, but the lowland gorilla he called family. It was July 22, 2017, along the pristine banks of Idaho's Salmon River, where towering pine trees cast long shadows across the rushing water. The remote wilderness area, known for its crystal-clear streams and abundant wildlife, had become the perfect destination for the Price family's annual camping adventure. Landon Price, a 34-year-old construction foreman, had driven his wife Sarah and their 2 young children, Emma and Jake, to this secluded spot 30 yards from the riverbank. What made this trip different from previous years was the modified dog crate secured in the back of their pickup truck, containing their most unusual family member. 2 years earlier, Landon had purchased Scout, a mountain cougar cub, from an exotic animal dealer operating in the gray areas of wildlife law. The construction worker's overconfident personality had convinced him that his experience with domestic animals would translate perfectly to raising a wild predator. He kept the growing cougar in a reinforced shed behind their suburban home, telling curious neighbors it was simply an unusually large dog breed. Sarah, an elementary school teacher, had grown increasingly uncomfortable with Scout's presence, especially after the children began complaining that the animal's eyes looked mean during feeding times. The warning signs had been mounting for weeks. Scout had killed 3 neighborhood cats in the past month, leaving their partially eaten remains scattered around the property. Just 2 weeks prior, the cougar had escaped from his enclosure and stalked the mail carrier for several blocks before Landon managed to recapture him. Local game wardens had received multiple reports of unusual animal sounds coming from the Price residence, but bureaucratic delays had prevented immediate investigation. Mountain cougars are apex predators perfectly designed for stealth hunting, with powerful hind legs capable of propelling their muscular bodies over 20 feet in a single bound. Adult males can weigh up to 140 pounds of pure muscle, equipped with razor-sharp retractable claws and canine teeth designed to deliver precise killing bites to the neck and spine. Unlike domestic cats, cougars retain all their wild instincts even when raised in captivity, and their hunting behavior becomes more pronounced in unfamiliar environments where territorial instincts are heightened. Landon's fatal mistake came when he decided to release Scout from the transport crate to allow the 3-year-old cougar to stretch and explore the wilderness setting. He genuinely believed that Scout's upbringing had domesticated the animal's wild nature, treating the predator like an oversized house cat. As the family set up their fishing equipment near the water's edge, Scout emerged from his confinement and immediately began surveying the unfamiliar territory. His tawny coat blended seamlessly with the surrounding brush as his yellow eyes methodically scanned the area, cataloging every movement and sound. The 140-pound cougar's predatory instincts activated the moment Landon walked toward the river to fill their water containers. Scout's pupils dilated as he crouched low behind a fallen log, his powerful muscles coiling like springs. The cougar's tail began twitching in the characteristic hunting pattern as he calculated distance and timing with deadly precision. Scout launched himself through the air in complete silence, covering 20 feet in a single explosive leap. His powerful body struck Landon squarely in the back. The cougar's 4-inch claws immediately sank deep into Landon's shoulders and back, designed by nature to grip struggling prey and prevent escape. The predator's jaws clamped down on the back of Landon's neck with surgical precision. Scout's canine teeth, evolved specifically for this killing technique, punctured the cervical vertebrae and severed the spinal cord instantly. The bite caused immediate paralysis from the neck down, leaving Landon completely unable to move his arms with his face submerged and his body completely paralyzed. Landon drowned within 90 seconds. His body went completely limp as Scout maintained his grip, following millions of years of evolutionary programming that ensured prey was thoroughly subdued before feeding. The cougar then demonstrated another instinctive behavior, dragging Landon's lifeless body toward the brush line to cache his kill away from potential scavengers. Sarah grabbed Emma and Jake, rushing them to the safety of their locked truck, where they remained for 3 terrifying hours until park rangers arrived. Authorities launched an immediate investigation into the illegal possession of the mountain cougar, while wildlife officials worked to safely capture Scout. The incident reignited debates about private exotic animal ownership and the inherent dangers these predators pose to families and communities. Landon Price's story was a chilling reminder of how quickly apex predators strike when instinct overrides familiarity. For Marcus Ellison, it wasn't the wilderness that harbored danger, but the jaguar he called Luna. It was September 8, 2015, on a sprawling ranch property in South Texas, where endless mesquite trees dotted the landscape under a star-filled sky. The remote 50-acre estate sat miles from the nearest neighbor, providing the perfect isolation for Marcus Ellison's dangerous hobby. The 41-year-old oil rig worker had converted an old barn into a makeshift big cat facility, complete with reinforced enclosures and feeding areas. Marcus shared the property with his girlfriend Lisa Chen, a 28-year-old veterinary technician who had grown increasingly concerned about their unusual housemate. 4 years earlier, Marcus had purchased Luna as a 6-month-old jaguar cub from a black market dealer operating along the Texas-Mexico border. His thrill-seeking personality and desire to collect dangerous animals as status symbols had driven him to spend his oil rig earnings on exotic pets. Luna had grown from an adorable spotted kitten into a powerful 180-pound predator. But Marcus genuinely believed their bond from her cubhood would protect him from any danger. Lisa had been pressuring him for months to surrender Luna to a proper sanctuary, especially after witnessing the jaguar's increasingly erratic behavior. The warning signs had been mounting steadily over the past week. Luna had been refusing all food for 4 consecutive days, despite Marcus offering her favorite cuts of meat. The jaguar had begun territorial marking throughout the house, leaving her scent on furniture and walls in a clear display of dominance. Her obsessive pacing had worn visible paths in the dirt floor of her enclosure, and Lisa noticed that Luna's pupils remained constantly dilated, indicating severe psychological stress. Neighbors living miles away reported hearing strange vocalizations echoing across the countryside during the night hours. Jaguars are the 3rd largest big cats in the world and possess the strongest bite force of any feline species, capable of crushing turtle shells and caiman skulls with ease. These apex predators are perfectly designed killing machines, with muscular bodies built for explosive power and jaws that can exert over 1,500 pounds of pressure per square inch. Unlike other big cats that typically suffocate their prey, jaguars deliver precise killing bites directly through the skull or spine, making them one of the most efficient predators in the animal kingdom. Even hand-raised jaguars retain all their wild instincts and can become unpredictably aggressive when stressed or challenged. Marcus made his fatal mistake when he decided to enter Luna's enclosure without backup or safety equipment. Concerned about her 4-day food refusal, he believed their years-long bond would allow him to safely investigate her condition. He unlocked the gate to her 30 by 40-foot pen and stepped inside, carrying only a small flashlight to illuminate the darkness. Luna sat motionless in the shadows, her yellow eyes reflecting the beam as he approached. The 180-pound jaguar had been waiting for this moment. As Marcus knelt 15 feet away and extended his hand in what he believed was a gesture of comfort, Luna's predatory instincts took complete control. Her powerful muscles, coiled like steel springs, propelled her across the enclosure in 2 swift bounds. Luna's attack was swift and devastatingly precise. Her massive body slammed into Marcus's chest with the force of a battering ram, sending him crashing backward onto the concrete floor. His flashlight skittered away into the darkness as Luna immediately went for the kill. Her jaws locked around Marcus's throat with surgical precision, her canine teeth penetrating deep into the soft tissue. The jaguar's bite force of 1,500 pounds per square inch crushed Marcus's windpipe instantly, cutting off his air supply completely. Her teeth simultaneously severed both carotid arteries, causing massive blood loss and immediate drop in blood pressure. The combination of crushed airways and severed blood vessels caused Marcus to lose consciousness within 30 seconds. Luna maintained her throat grip for 3 full minutes, following her natural instinct to ensure prey was completely subdued before feeding. Once satisfied that Marcus was dead, she released her hold and began her feeding behavior. Starting with the soft tissue of his abdomen, her powerful jaws easily crushed through ribs to access internal organs. Her razor-sharp teeth made quick work of muscle and bone as she consumed her kill. Lisa discovered the horrific scene the following morning when she came to feed the animals. Luna sat calmly in the corner of her enclosure, methodically grooming blood from her paws and face. Marcus's partially consumed body lay in the center of the pen, a grim testament to the power of wild instincts. The incident sparked renewed calls for stricter regulations on exotic animal ownership in Texas. Marcus's family released a statement acknowledging the inherent dangers of keeping wild predators as pets, urging others to learn from their tragic loss. Marcus Ellison's story was a brutal reminder of how quickly predatory instincts override years of apparent domestication. For Brianna Ellis, it wasn't the open ocean that posed the threat, but the backyard predator she called Brutus. It was June 14, 2018, in the suburban neighborhood of Homestead, Florida, where manicured lawns and palm trees created a deceptively peaceful setting. Behind a modest rental house sat an elaborate backyard pond system, 40 by 60 feet of artificially maintained water that had become home to one of nature's most dangerous predators. Brianna Ellis, a 26-year-old marine biology graduate student, had been using this location for her thesis research on reptilian behavior patterns. She shared the property with her friends Kevin Torres, a 27-year-old photographer documenting her work, and Amanda Walsh, a 25-year-old social media influencer who had rented the house specifically for its unique backyard feature. 2 years earlier, Brianna had rescued Brutus from a failing roadside attraction that was being shut down by authorities. The 9-foot American alligator had been malnourished and living in deplorable conditions, prompting Brianna's decision to relocate him to what she believed was a better environment. Her academic knowledge of reptilian behavior had convinced her that she could safely study Brutus while providing him proper care. Amanda's landlord remained completely unaware that a 350-pound apex predator was living in his backyard pond. The warning signs had been escalating dramatically over the past month. Brutus had become increasingly aggressive during feeding times, lunging at the pond's edge whenever anyone approached. Despite her friends' protests, Brianna had continued hand-feeding the massive reptile, believing her scientific understanding gave her an advantage. Neighbors had been complaining about strange splashing sounds echoing through the night, and Brutus had been floating motionless for hours, displaying classic hunting behavior. American alligators are among the most efficient predators on Earth, perfectly evolved killing machines that have remained virtually unchanged for millions of years. Adult males can reach lengths of 14 feet and weights exceeding 800 pounds, with jaws capable of exerting nearly 3,000 pounds of pressure per square inch. Their bite force is strong enough to crush a bowling ball, and their signature death roll technique can dismember prey within seconds. These apex predators are ambush hunters by nature, capable of explosive bursts of speed. Brianna made her fatal mistake as the Florida sun began setting over the suburban landscape. She had dropped her pH testing equipment into the deeper section of the pond earlier that day, and the waterlogged instruments needed to be retrieved manually. Despite Kevin's suggestions to use a pool net, Brianna insisted on entering the water herself to recover the expensive scientific equipment. This decision proved catastrophic, as dusk represents the most active hunting period for alligators. As Brianna waded into the pond, the water reaching her thighs, Brutus began his approach with the stealth that had made his species apex predators for millions of years. The 350-pound alligator moved through the water with incredible precision, his massive body creating no visible wake as he closed the distance. Brianna bent down to retrieve her submerged equipment, completely focused on the task and unaware that Brutus had positioned himself just 6 feet away. The alligator remained perfectly motionless beneath the surface, his eyes and nostrils barely visible above the waterline as he prepared for his explosive assault. The attack came with devastating force and lightning speed. Brutus launched himself upward and forward in one fluid motion, his massive jaws opening wide to reveal rows of conical teeth. His bite encompassed Brianna's entire right thigh, and his jaw pressure of nearly 3,000 pounds per square inch crushed her femur bone instantly. Brianna's screams pierced the evening air as Brutus immediately began his signature death roll technique. The powerful alligator spun his body rapidly, using his muscular tail for propulsion, creating a whirlpool of churning water and blood. The rotational force generated by his 350-pound body tore Brianna's leg completely away at the hip joint within seconds. The severed femoral artery released massive amounts of blood into the water, causing immediate shock. Before Brianna could escape, Brutus released the severed limb and attacked again with ruthless efficiency. His jaws clamped down on her torso, his teeth puncturing her ribcage and vital organs as he dragged her toward the deeper section of the pond. The alligator held Brianna underwater with relentless determination. The thrashing continued beneath the surface for nearly 2 minutes as Brutus performed his instinctive drowning technique. Brianna's body went completely limp as her lungs filled with water mixed with her own blood. The alligator maintained his grip until all movement ceased. Kevin and Amanda immediately called emergency services, but the responding dive team could only recover scattered remains the following day. Brutus had retreated to the deepest section of the pond with his kill. Local authorities launched a comprehensive investigation into the illegal possession of the dangerous reptile, while wildlife officials worked to safely capture and relocate Brutus. The incident prompted immediate changes to local ordinances regarding exotic animal ownership in residential areas. Brianna Ellis's story was a tragic reminder of how scientific confidence can be shattered by primal instinct. For Sean Gallagher, it wasn't controlled research that posed danger, but the black bear he called Kodiak. It was October 3, 2016, in the remote wilderness of the Adirondack Mountains in upstate New York, where towering evergreens stretched endlessly toward gray autumn skies. 15 miles from the nearest neighbor, a weathered log cabin sat nestled among dense forest, accessible only by a narrow dirt road. This isolated retreat had become home to Sean Gallagher, a 38-year-old former wildlife rehabilitator whose career had ended in disgrace 3 years earlier. The bitter and increasingly paranoid man had retreated to this inherited family property after losing his rehabilitation license following a previous bear incident that left him with a permanent limp. Sean shared his remote sanctuary with Kodiak, an 8-year-old American black bear weighing 400 pounds. He had illegally acquired the animal as an injured cub 3 years prior, claiming to rescue it from certain death in the wild. His obsession with proving his rehabilitation methods were superior to state-approved programs had driven him to keep Kodiak despite losing his professional credentials. The bear lived in a reinforced room within the cabin, a makeshift arrangement that had grown increasingly inadequate as Kodiak matured. Sean's journal entries from recent weeks revealed growing paranoia about the bear's intentions and his deteriorating mental state from years of isolation. The warning signs had been escalating dramatically over the past month. Kodiak had been systematically destroying the cabin's interior, tearing apart furniture and clawing deep gouges in the wooden walls. The bear had become increasingly aggressive when Sean attempted to limit his food portions, displaying territorial behavior that should have served as a clear warning. Most concerning was Kodiak's obsessive testing of door and window strength, repeatedly pushing against barriers as if calculating escape routes. American black bears are deceptively powerful predators despite their smaller size compared to grizzlies, with adult males capable of reaching speeds of 30 miles per hour and possessing the strength to overturn boulders weighing several hundred pounds. Their powerful jaws can exert over 800 pounds of pressure per square inch, easily capable of crushing human skulls, while their 4-inch claws are designed for climbing and digging but prove devastatingly effective weapons. Black bears are naturally nocturnal creatures, most active during twilight and nighttime hours when their predatory instincts are heightened. Sean made his fatal mistake at 2:30 in the morning when he decided to enter Kodiak's reinforced room to retrieve his damaged laptop and camera equipment. The bear appeared to be sleeping peacefully in the corner of the 15 by 20 foot space, his massive form barely visible in the darkness. Sean desperately needed to recover his electronics before they were completely destroyed by the bear's ongoing rampage. He stepped quietly into the room carrying only a small flashlight, believing Kodiak was in deep sleep. What Sean failed to realize was that Kodiak had been awake for hours, waiting with the patience that made black bears such effective predators. The bear's naturally nocturnal behavior meant his senses were at peak alertness during these early morning hours, and captivity had made him increasingly territorial about his confined space. The 400-pound black bear moved with surprising speed and agility. Kodiak rose to his full height of 7 feet and charged across the room in 3 powerful strides. Sean had no time to react as the bear's enormous frame filled his vision. Kodiak's first strike came from his massive right paw, equipped with 4-inch claws designed by nature for climbing and digging. The blow struck Sean squarely in the chest with tremendous force, his claws raking 4 parallel gashes across his ribcage that penetrated deep into muscle and bone. The impact launched Sean backward into the reinforced wall with bone-crushing force. Before Sean could even attempt to defend himself, Kodiak pressed his attack with methodical efficiency. The bear's powerful jaws clamped down on Sean's head, encompassing his skull from temple to temple. Kodiak's bite force of 800 pounds per square inch crushed Sean's skull like an eggshell, causing immediate and catastrophic brain trauma. Brain matter leaked between the bear's teeth as he shook his massive head violently. Sean's body went completely limp within seconds, but Kodiak's defensive rage kept driving the assault. The bear mauled with relentless power, claws raking and jaws crushing bone as if to eliminate a threat rather than feed. In his fury, Kodiak tore into Sean's torso, ribs splintering under the pressure, leaving a scene of raw devastation born not of hunger, but of instinctive dominance and fear. The attack continued for 15 minutes before Kodiak finally retreated to his corner, leaving Sean's partially consumed remains scattered across the wooden floor. The bear sat calmly, grooming blood from its claws and muzzle. Sean's body was discovered 3 days later when concerned neighbors noticed smoke was no longer rising from the cabin's chimney. Local authorities launched an immediate investigation into the illegal possession of the black bear, while wildlife officials worked to safely tranquilize and relocate Kodiak to a proper sanctuary.
It was March 12, 2016, and the sprawling Texas ranch of oil executive Richard Blackwood buzzed with the excitement of a Sweet 16 celebration. The 2,000-acre property outside Houston showcased everything money could buy: manicured lawns, an Olympic-sized pool, and custom-built enclosures housing some of the world's most dangerous animals. The afternoon sun beat down on colorful party decorations while 20 teenagers and their parents gathered around tables laden with gourmet food and champagne. But the real attraction wasn't the birthday cake or expensive gifts. It was Raja, the 450-pound Bengal tiger that Rich kept as his ultimate status symbol. At 48, Rich had built his fortune in the oil industry through a combination of shrewd business deals and an appetite for risk that had made him millions. His success had also fed an ego that demanded constant validation, leading him to collect exotic animals like trophies. For 4 years, he had owned Raja, treating the apex predator like an oversized house cat and regularly showing him off to impress business associates and friends. Rich's ranch had become famous in Houston's elite circles for its dangerous menagerie. Rich's relationship with Raja had started when the tiger was just a cub, purchased from a private breeder for over $50,000. As Raja grew into a massive adult male, Rich had convinced himself that their bond made him immune to the animal's predatory instincts. He regularly entered the tiger's enclosure without protective equipment, ignoring the warnings of his hired animal handler. Bengal tigers are among the world's most powerful predators, with adult males weighing up to 500 pounds and possessing the strength to kill prey much larger than themselves. They're solitary, territorial animals with razor-sharp claws that can grow up to 4 inches long, and jaws capable of delivering a bite force exceeding 1,000 pounds per square inch. Despite being raised in captivity, tigers retain all their wild instincts and can become extremely aggressive during mating season or when they feel their territory is threatened. That afternoon, Rich had been drinking champagne and basking in the attention of his daughter's friends, who were fascinated by his exotic animals. As the party progressed, several teenagers had asked to see Raja up close, and Rich saw an opportunity to cement his reputation as the coolest dad in Houston. What he didn't realize was that Raja had been displaying increased territorial behavior over the past few weeks due to mating season. Rich announced to the party guests that he would demonstrate his special relationship with Raja by entering the tiger's enclosure. Despite his handler's urgent protests and his wife's obvious concern, Rich was determined to put on a show for the impressed teenagers. The attack came without warning or provocation. Raja suddenly exploded into motion, his 450-pound frame covering the distance between them in 2 powerful bounds. Rich had no time to react, as the massive tiger slammed into his chest, knocking him backward onto the ground with bone-crushing force. The tiger's massive jaws clamped down on Rich's throat with devastating force, his 4-inch canine teeth puncturing through the corroded artery and trachea. Rich's body convulsed as Raja's powerful bite severed major blood vessels and crushed his windpipe. Blood poured from the massive neck wounds as Raja's teeth found purchase in Rich's throat, cutting off his air supply and causing massive blood loss. Raja's razor-sharp claws raked across Rich's torso, each swipe opening deep gashes that severed muscles and arteries. The tiger's front paws struck Rich's chest and abdomen with sledgehammer force, crushing ribs and rupturing internal organs. Rich's expensive party clothes were shredded within seconds, as Raja's claws found flesh. The party guests screamed in horror as they witnessed the savage attack. Several adults tried desperately to distract the tiger by shouting and throwing objects, but Raja maintained his grip on Rich's throat. The teenagers who had been so eager to see the tiger up close now watched in traumatized silence as their friend's father was killed before their eyes. Rich's movement ceased within the first 3 minutes of the attack, as massive blood loss and suffocation overwhelmed his system. Raja released his grip and stood guard over the body, pacing around his kill while the horrified witnesses called 911 and begged for help. Emergency responders arrived within 12 minutes, but they were powerless to intervene while Raja remained agitated near the body. Animal control officers with tranquilizer guns took another 15 minutes to safely sedate the tiger, during which time the party guests were forced to watch as Raja continued to pace around Rich's remains. The investigation revealed that Rich had violated numerous safety protocols and ignored multiple warnings about Raja's increasingly aggressive behavior. The tiger was euthanized the following day, as authorities determined he posed an ongoing threat to public safety. The traumatized party guests required extensive counseling, and several of the teenagers who witnessed the attack struggled with PTSD for years afterward. Rich's death wasn't an isolated incident among exotic pet owners. In Florida, a retired mechanic's 4th of July barbecue would turn into a nightmare when his illegal alligator's predatory instincts took over. It was July 4th, 2015, and the backyard of Bobby Ray Jenkins' Florida home buzzed with the sounds of a traditional Independence Day celebration. The sprawling property in rural Polk County featured a large deck, multiple grills smoking with barbecue, and a custom-built concrete pool to house the most unusual party guest of all, Chomper, a 400-pound American alligator that Bobby Ray had been keeping illegally for over 8 years. 15 family members had gathered for the annual celebration, including children who had grown up watching their grandfather's dangerous relationship with the massive reptile. At 52, Bobby Ray was a retired auto mechanic who had spent his working years fixing engines and his retirement years collecting increasingly dangerous pets. His fascination with alligators had started when he found Chomper as a baby in a drainage ditch near his property. What began as a temporary rescue had evolved into an obsession, with Bobby Ray building an elaborate habitat and feeding system for the growing predator. He had ignored multiple warnings from Florida Fish and Wildlife officials. Bobby Ray's relationship with Chomper had become the stuff of local legend. He regularly hand-fed the massive alligator during family gatherings, treating the apex predator like an oversized pet dog. His grandchildren had grown up watching these feeding demonstrations, and Bobby Ray took pride in his ability to interact safely with one of nature's most dangerous predators. American alligators are apex predators that have remained virtually unchanged for over 200 million years, perfectly adapted for their role as ambush hunters in aquatic environments. Adult males can reach lengths of 14 feet and weights exceeding 1,000 pounds, with jaw muscles capable of exerting over 3,000 pounds of pressure per square inch. Their bite force is among the strongest in the animal kingdom, capable of crushing turtle shells and breaking the bones of larger mammals. Alligators are opportunistic feeders, driven entirely by instinct, and they view any movement near their territory as either a threat to be eliminated or prey to be consumed. That afternoon, Bobby Ray had been drinking beer and entertaining his family with stories of his adventures with Chomper. The alligator was floating motionlessly in his concrete pool, appearing docile and harmless in the Florida heat. As the barbecue progressed, several family members requested the traditional feeding demonstration that had become a highlight of their gatherings. Bobby Ray was happy to oblige, retrieving a whole chicken from his outdoor refrigerator. The 15 family members gathered around the pool's edge, with children sitting on their parents' shoulders to get a better view of the spectacle. Bobby Ray approached the pool's edge with the whole chicken dangling from his hand, calling out to Chomper in the playful tone he had used for years. As Bobby Ray leaned forward to drop the chicken into Chomper's waiting jaws, he lost his balance and fell partially into the pool. The moment his arm hit the water, Chomper's predatory instincts took over completely. The massive alligator's jaw snapped shut on Bobby Ray's extended arm with bone-crushing force, his 3,000 pounds of bite pressure instantly fracturing bones and severing major arteries. Chomper immediately began his signature death roll, spinning rapidly in the water while maintaining his grip on Bobby Ray's arm. The violent rotation dislocated Bobby Ray's shoulder and pulled him fully into the pool, where the alligator's natural advantages became overwhelming. The family members screamed in horror as they watched Bobby Ray being dragged underwater, his blood turning the pool water crimson. The death roll continued for nearly a minute, each rotation causing additional trauma to Bobby Ray's arm and torso, while simultaneously disorienting him and filling his lungs with water. Chomper's powerful tail thrashed violently, striking Bobby Ray's body with enough force to crack ribs and cause internal bleeding. The alligator's grip never loosened, his teeth designed specifically for holding on to struggling prey. Bobby Ray's desperate attempts to break free only triggered Chomper's instincts to bite down harder and roll more aggressively. The massive alligator dragged his victim to the deeper end of the pool, where Bobby Ray's struggles grew weaker as blood loss and drowning combined to overwhelm his system. Within minutes, Bobby Ray's movement ceased, as the massive alligator's death roll proved unsurvivable. Chomper dragged Bobby Ray's lifeless body underwater, his instincts driving him to secure his kill in the depths of the pool. The traumatized family members, including young children, were forced to witness the entire gruesome spectacle. Emergency responders arrived within 18 minutes, but Chomper remained highly agitated and dangerous in the pool. It took wildlife officers over 90 minutes to safely tranquilize the massive alligator and recover what remained of Bobby Ray's body. The investigation revealed that Bobby Ray had been keeping the alligator illegally for years, ignoring multiple warnings from wildlife officials. Chomper was euthanized the following day, and Bobby Ray's death prompted stricter enforcement of exotic animal regulations in Florida. The traumatized family members required extensive counseling, and several of the children who witnessed the attack developed lasting psychological trauma. But dangerous reptiles aren't the only pets that can turn deadly. In Connecticut, a retired teacher's dinner party would become a bloodbath when her beloved chimpanzee's territorial instincts exploded. It was October 8, 2017, and the cozy suburban home of retired teacher Margaret Foster in Stamford, Connecticut, was set for an elegant dinner party. The dining room table was perfectly arranged with fine china and crystal glasses, while the aroma of roast beef and fresh bread filled the air. 6 close friends had gathered for what had become a monthly tradition, but there was one additional guest who made these gatherings unique: Bruno, a 180-pound male chimpanzee who had been Margaret's constant companion for 12 years. At 61, Margaret was a former elementary school teacher who had dedicated her life to caring for others. First her students and then Bruno, whom she had acquired from a defunct research facility when he was just an infant. She had raised him like her own child, allowing him to sleep in her own bed, eat at the dinner table, and interact freely with visitors. Margaret refused to acknowledge that Bruno had become increasingly aggressive and unpredictable as he reached full maturity, dismissing his occasional outbursts as normal behavior for an intelligent animal. Margaret's friends had grown accustomed to Bruno's presence at their dinner parties, though several had expressed private concerns about his size and strength. Bruno had been displaying more territorial behavior recently, becoming possessive of Margaret and showing signs of aggression towards strangers. But Margaret insisted that Bruno was harmless, and that their bond transcended any natural instincts he might possess. Chimpanzees are among the strongest primates on Earth, with adult males possessing the strength of 5 grown men. They have powerful jaws filled with sharp teeth, long arms with incredible reach, and hands capable of gripping with crushing force. Despite their intelligence and capacity for learning, chimpanzees remain wild animals with unpredictable temperaments. Adult males can become extremely territorial and aggressive, especially when they perceive threats to their social hierarchy or living space. Their attacks are swift, brutal, and often fatal, as they instinctively target the face, hands, and genitals of their victims. That evening, Margaret had allowed Bruno to join the dinner party as usual, seating him in his customary chair at the head of the table. The conversation was lively and the wine was flowing freely when one of the guests accidentally knocked over a crystal wine glass. The loud crash and sudden movement triggered something primal in Bruno's brain, and his demeanor changed instantly from calm to agitated. Instead of removing Bruno from the situation, Margaret tried to calm him down by approaching him directly and speaking in soothing tones. This was exactly the wrong response, as Bruno interpreted her approach as either submission or a challenge to his dominance. The massive chimpanzee's eyes narrowed, and he began making aggressive vocalizations that should have warned everyone to evacuate immediately. Bruno's attack was swift and savage. He launched himself at Margaret with explosive force, his powerful arms wrapping around her torso as his teeth found her face and hands. The 180-pound primate's strength was overwhelming, and Margaret had no chance to defend herself against an animal that possessed 5 times her physical power. Bruno's teeth tore into Margaret's face and scalp, ripping away chunks of flesh, while his powerful hands gripped her arms and shoulders. The chimpanzee's attack was methodical and brutal, targeting the areas that would cause maximum damage and disable his victim most effectively. Margaret's screams filled the dining room as Bruno continued his assault, his natural instinct driving him to eliminate what he perceived as a threat. The dinner guests watched in absolute horror as Bruno bit off several of Margaret's fingers, the bones crunching audibly between its powerful jaws. The chimpanzee's hands, each capable of crushing bones, struck Margaret's face and torso repeatedly, while his teeth continued to tear at her hands and genitals. Blood splattered across the elegant dining room as Bruno's savage attack continued. Margaret's struggles grew weaker as massive blood loss and trauma overwhelmed her system. Bruno showed no signs of stopping his assault, driven by instincts that have been suppressed but never eliminated by years of domestication. The horrified guests were too terrified to intervene, knowing that approaching the enraged chimpanzee would likely result in additional casualties. Within minutes, Margaret's movement ceased as Bruno's brutal attack proved fatal. The massive chimpanzee continued to maul her lifeless body, his aggression showing no signs of diminishing. The traumatized dinner guests had called 911, and police officers arrived quickly to assess the immediate threat. When officers entered the home, they immediately shot Bruno to stop his continued assault on Margaret's body. The investigation revealed that Margaret had been keeping the chimpanzee illegally, as Connecticut had banned private ownership of primates years earlier. Her death prompted renewed calls for stricter exotic animal regulations and better enforcement of existing laws. The traumatized dinner guests required extensive psychological counseling, and several developed lasting PTSD from witnessing the brutal attack. Margaret's death became a cautionary tale about the dangers of keeping wild animals as pets, regardless of how long they have been in captivity. Margaret's tragedy was part of a disturbing pattern. In Montana, a logger's weekend barbecue would become a nightmare when his pet black bear's food aggression turned deadly. It was August 19, 2014, and the rustic cabin of logger Frank Morrison, nestled in the Montana wilderness, was alive with the sounds of a weekend barbecue. The property, surrounded by dense forests and mountain peaks, hosted 4 neighbor families who had gathered to enjoy Frank's famous grilled steaks and his most unusual attraction, Buster, a 350-pound male black bear that Frank had been illegally feeding for over 3 years. The afternoon sun filtered through the pine trees as children played on the wooden deck while adults gathered around picnic tables laden with food and beer. At 44, Frank was a third-generation logger who had spent his entire life in the Montana wilderness, developing what he believed was a special understanding of wild animals. His relationship with Buster had started innocently enough when the bear was just a yearling, drawn to Frank's property by the smell of cooking food. What began as occasional food scraps had evolved into daily feedings, and Frank had convinced himself that he had tamed one of nature's most powerful predators. Frank's neighbors had initially been fascinated by his relationship with the massive bear, but several had grown concerned as Buster became increasingly bold and aggressive around food. The bear had been displaying more territorial behavior as winter approached, his natural instincts driving him to consume as many calories as possible before hibernation. Black bears are North America's most common bear species, with adult males weighing between 300 and 400 pounds. Despite their name, they can be brown, cinnamon, or even blonde in color, and they possess incredible strength capable of breaking down doors and overturning cars. Black bears are omnivores with powerful jaws and razor-sharp claws designed for digging and climbing, but they can become extremely dangerous when defending food sources or feeling threatened. Their bite force exceeds 800 pounds per square inch, and their speed and agility make escape nearly impossible once an attack begins. That afternoon, Frank had been drinking heavily and entertaining his guests with stories of his adventures with Buster. The massive bear was pacing near the tree line, drawn by the smell of grilling meat and clearly agitated by the presence of so many people near his established feeding area. As the barbecue progressed, several neighbors requested a demonstration of Frank's special relationship with the bear. Frank retrieved a plate of raw steaks from the grill, announcing to his guests that he would hand-feed Buster directly to show how docile and trustworthy the bear had become. The four families gathered at a safe distance, with children perched on their parents' shoulders to get a better view. The attack came when Frank moved too slowly with the food, hesitating for dramatic effect while his guests watched. Buster's patience, already strained by hunger and the stress of multiple humans in his territory, finally snapped. The 350-pound bear charged Frank with explosive speed, covering the distance between them in seconds. Buster's massive paw struck Frank in the chest with bone-crushing force, sending him sprawling backward onto the wooden deck. The plate of steak scattered across the ground as Frank tried desperately to scramble away. But Buster was already on top of him. The bear's powerful jaws clamped down on Frank's shoulder, his teeth puncturing through muscle and bone while his claws raked across Frank's torso. The horrified neighbors and their children watched as Buster began mauling Frank with savage intensity. The bear's claws, each over 2 inches long, opened deep gashes across Frank's chest and arms, severing arteries and causing massive blood loss. Frank's screams echoed across the property as Buster's assault continued, driven by a combination of food aggression and territorial instincts. Buster's powerful jaws worked methodically, crushing bones and tearing flesh as he viewed Frank not as a friend, but as a competition for the scattered food. The bear's bite force shattered Frank's ribs and punctured vital organs, while his claws continued to rake across his victim's body. Frank's struggles grew weaker as blood loss and trauma overwhelmed his body. Within minutes, Frank's movement ceased as the massive bear's attack proved fatal. Unlike predatory attacks, Buster showed no interest in consuming Frank's body, instead leaving the lifeless form and moving toward the scattered steaks on the deck. Emergency responders arrived within 25 minutes, but Buster had already retreated into the forest after consuming the meat. Wildlife officials were forced to track and shoot the bear the following day when he returned to the property, as his aggressive behavior around humans made him too dangerous to relocate. The investigation revealed that Frank had been illegally feeding Buster for years, creating a dangerous situation that wildlife officials had warned against repeatedly. Frank's death prompted stricter enforcement of wildlife feeding regulations in Montana, and several of the families who witnessed the attack required extensive psychological counseling. Yet the pattern of exotic pet tragedies continued in Florida, where a construction contractor's pool party would become a nightmare when his massive python stress response turned deadly. It was June 25, 2013, and the backyard of construction contractor Carlos Mendez's suburban Florida home was transformed into a tropical paradise for his annual pool party. The spacious property featured a kidney-shaped swimming pool surrounded by palm trees and tiki torches, while 12 guests enjoyed barbecue and cocktails in the warm evening air. But the real attraction wasn't the food or drinks. It was Serpentina, a 200-pound Burmese python that Carlos regularly brought to social gatherings as his ultimate conversation starter. At 38, Carlos had built a successful construction business through hard work and an appetite for attention that extended to his choice of pets. He had owned Serpentina for 6 years, treating the massive snake like a living accessory that never failed to impress friends and clients. Carlos regularly draped the 16-foot python around his shoulders at parties, Believing that his bond with the apex predator demonstrated his fearlessness and made him unforgettable to potential business contacts. Carlos's relationship with Serpentina had become legendary among his social circle. He often brought the massive snake to pool parties and barbecues, allowing guests to touch her scales and pose for photos. Carlos took pride in his ability to handle one of the world's largest constrictors, dismissing concerns from friends who worried about the snake's size and strength. Burmese pythons are among the world's largest snakes, capable of reaching lengths over 20 feet and weights exceeding 250 pounds. They're powerful constrictors that kill their prey by wrapping their muscular bodies around victims and squeezing with tremendous force, up to 90 pounds of pressure per square inch. These snakes are ambush predators with excellent swimming abilities, and they can remain submerged for up to 20 minutes while hunting. When stressed or threatened, Burmese pythons become extremely dangerous, using their incredible strength to defend themselves against any perceived threat. That evening, Carlos had been drinking and entertaining his guests with stories of his adventures with Serpentina. As the party progressed, several guests requested a demonstration of his famous snake handling skills. Carlos decided to take the spectacle to the next level by bringing Serpentina into the pool, planning to swim with the massive python while his impressed guests watched from the deck. The 12 party guests gathered around the pool's edge, phones ready to capture what they expected to be an impressive but harmless display. Carlos entered the shallow end of the pool carrying Serpentina, her massive body draped across his shoulders and arms. The snake appeared calm initially, but the combination of water, noise, and unfamiliar environment began to stress her beyond her tolerance level. Serpentina's constriction response was swift and methodical. Feeling threatened and disoriented by the water and crowd, the 200-pound python began wrapping her powerful coils around Carlos's torso and neck. What started as normal positioning quickly became a deadly embrace, as Serpentina's stress-triggered constricting instincts took over completely. Carlos's initial laughter turned to concern, then panic, as Serpentina's coils tightened around his chest and throat. The massive snake's body worked with mechanical precision, each loop finding purchase around Carlos's ribcage and neck, while her incredible strength began compressing his vital organs. Carlos tried to unwrap the snake's coils, but 200 pounds of muscle was far beyond his ability to control. The horrified party guests watched as Carlos's face began turning red, then blue, as Serpentina's coils cut off his air supply. The python's grip tightened with each breath Carlos tried to take, her muscles responding to his struggles with increased pressure. Carlos's desperate attempts to reach the pool's edge were hampered by the snake's weight and the water's resistance. Several guests jumped into the pool to help, grabbing at Serpentina's coils and trying to unwrap them from Carlos's body. But the python's grip was far too strong for multiple people to overcome, and their efforts only seemed to make her constrict harder. Carlos's struggles grew weaker as oxygen deprivation and the crushing pressure overwhelmed his system. Serpentina's coils worked methodically around Carlos's chest and neck, compressing his ribcage and cutting off blood flow to his brain. The massive snake's body formed tight loops that functioned like a living vice, applying pressure that no human body could withstand. Carlos's movements became increasingly feeble as the python's deadly embrace continued. The traumatized party guests could only watch helplessly as Carlos slowly suffocated in the shallow end of his own pool. His face turned purple as Serpentina's coils compressed his throat and chest, making breathing impossible. Within minutes, Carlos's movement ceased as the massive python's constrictions proved fatal. Emergency responders arrived within 10 minutes. and paramedics immediately began working to free Carlos from the python's grip. Law enforcement officers killed the snake on the spot, and within minutes they had cut through the coils to remove Carlos's body. Despite immediate CPR attempts, Carlos was pronounced dead at the scene. The investigation revealed that Carlos had been keeping Serpentina without proper permits, violating Florida's exotic animal regulations. His death prompted renewed calls for stricter enforcement of python ownership laws and better education about the dangers of keeping large constrictors as pets. The traumatized party guests required extensive psychological counseling, and several developed lasting PTSD from witnessing Carlos's slow death in the pool. His death became a cautionary tale about the dangers of treating wild animals as party entertainment, regardless of how long they have been in captivity. It was September 14, 2017, under the harsh New Mexico sun outside Ruidoso Down. At a makeshift sanctuary behind rusted gates, the sounds of children's laughter would soon be replaced by screams as Nina, a 200-pound black jaguar, shattered the illusion of safety that Tyler Qualls had carefully constructed. Tyler was a 46-year-old retired Army medic who had returned from 2 tours in Iraq with shattered nerves and a deep mistrust of civilization. His father's death had left him 6 acres of desert land, which he gradually turned into what he called the micro-sanctuary. The property housed 2 bobcats, a few rescued reptiles, and Nina, the jaguar he considered the crown jewel of his operation. Tyler had purchased Nina from a Texas breeder 2 years earlier, paying in cash and transporting her across state lines in a modified horse trailer. He often said his military background gave him intuitive respect for apex predators, claiming he didn't need formal training. He ran the place alone, no staff, no protocols, no emergency barriers. He rejected tranquilizers and carried no firearm. His solution to danger was confidence, which he believed animals could sense. Once a month, Tyler hosted open house days, low-key events advertised through local forums and word of mouth. Visitors were allowed close-up views of the animals from behind standard chain-link fences. Tyler would lead casual tours barefoot, speaking about natural balance, trust, and how fear is what gets people hurt. His self-printed brochures mentioned animal welfare but omitted any legal disclaimers or real warnings. On the morning of September 14th, 11 visitors arrived, including a couple from Albuquerque with 2 children, a tourist group from Arizona, and 3 local residents. By 10 a.m., they had gathered near Nina's enclosure, a 20 by 30 foot space enclosed by chain-link fencing and shaded by a salvaged metal carport. The guests took photos as Tyler talked about Nina's diet, daily behavior, and his belief that she saw him as family. Unbeknownst to the guests, Nina had been showing troubling behavior for several days. Tyler's veterinarian friend, who occasionally stopped by to check the animals, had warned him the jaguar might be entering pre-estrus, a hormonal phase where big cats become more territorial, aggressive, and unpredictable. Tyler brushed it off, saying that she's moody, not dangerous. But wild behavior doesn't disappear in captivity. Captive jaguars retain the same instincts as their wild counterparts, and pre-estrus only amplifies their sensitivity to any perceived intrusion or competition. By 10:30 a.m., Tyler decided to demonstrate his bond with Nina. With a bucket of raw chicken in one hand, he unlatched the enclosure gate and stepped inside, barefoot as always. He waved off concerns from guests, saying that Nina knows him. He turned his back to pour food into the trough, and that's when it happened. Nina had been crouched behind a boulder near the enclosure's rear wall. Her posture was low, ears flat, eyes locked on her target. She didn't growl, she didn't snarl, she lunged. 200 pounds of muscular predator closed the 10-foot distance in a second. Her claws struck first, tearing through Tyler's side and spinning him off balance. Her jaws clamped down on his lower back, targeting the pelvis. A loud crack echoed through the enclosure, his spine fracturing under the bite force. Tyler collapsed, screaming, legs motionless. Nina didn't hesitate. She gripped his limp body and dragged it behind the boulder. Blood stained the sand as she disappeared from view. The guests outside froze. One woman screamed. A man fumbled for his phone. But no one could enter the enclosure. There was no secondary gate, no lockout zone, no way to intervene. The 911 call came at 10:34 a.m. The dispatcher recorded multiple overlapping voices, most describing a man being dragged and mauled by a large black cat. Emergency responders arrived at 10:52 a.m. They found Nina crouched over Tyler's body, her muzzle red, her ears forward, posture stiff. She stood as the officers approached the gate, displaying classic defensive behavior. When she stepped forward baring her teeth, she was shot twice through the head with a .308 caliber rifle. Inside the enclosure, the scene was gruesome. Tyler's skull had been crushed, likely from a single bite by Nina's canines. Deep puncture wounds marked his back and legs, and his torso showed signs of feeding behavior. Claw marks stretched from his hip to his ribs. The ground beneath him was soaked in blood. The investigation determined that Tyler died within minutes of the initial attack. The spinal injury had paralyzed him instantly, and blood loss from multiple arterial wounds proved fatal. There was no sign of disease in Nina, no sedatives or stimulants, no evidence of provocation. She had simply acted on instinct. The enclosure met minimum state requirements but had no redundancy. It had blind spots, no reinforced barrier between the animal and caretaker, and no emergency plan in place. Authorities concluded that the attack was preventable, not because Nina behaved unnaturally, but because Tyler had ignored basic safety measures. Tyler's remains were cremated. His sister, a schoolteacher from Las Cruces, organized a small service attended by a few of Tyler's former Army colleagues. The ceremony was held at a veteran center with a photo of Tyler in uniform placed next to a folded American flag. No one spoke publicly about the Jaguar. Within a month, the sanctuary was disbanded. The 2 bobcats were relocated to a licensed wildlife center in Colorado. The fencing was taken down, the structures dismantled, and the land put up for sale. State officials closed the investigation quietly. No charges were filed, since Tyler had not technically violated any enforceable statute. New Mexico had no comprehensive regulation on big cat ownership at the time. In the end, the state labeled the event an isolated incident. But as the desert witnessed another self-proclaimed animal whisperer's fatal overconfidence with a jaguar hundreds of miles away in Georgia, a lady would discover that years of backdoor bonding meant nothing when a gorilla's territorial instincts finally override human delusions. It was June 2nd, 2015. The air heavy in Calhoun as string lights glowed softly over a quiet backyard gathering. Neighbors and former students mingled around folding tables laden with potato salad and sweet tea, unaware that their host, Trish Bolin, was about to lead them toward a tragedy that would unfold in seconds but haunt them forever. Trish was a 53-year-old former high school science teacher who had channeled her grief over her husband's death 6 years earlier into an obsession with primatology. Her modest ranch home had become an unofficial educational center, where she hosted library lectures and property tours centered around her prized possession, Rafi, a 400-pound male silverback gorilla she had acquired through questionable permit loopholes in 2009. Trish had convinced herself that Rafi, hand-raised from infancy, possessed human-level empathy and could be controlled through modified sign language and routine care. She dismissed the warnings of friends who noticed his increasingly aggressive behavior, the object throwing, the territorial charging, the refusal to respond to commands. These were classic signs of a mature male gorilla asserting dominance, behaviors that in the wild would establish his position within the troop hierarchy, and she was blind to it. The custom-built outbuilding where Rafi lived featured steel framing and double doors. But Trish's deadly flaw was her belief that barriers were unnecessary between her and her roommate. She routinely entered his enclosure without protective barriers, a practice that violated every USDA recommendation for primate handling. Her confidence in their bond had blinded her to the fundamental truth that gorillas, regardless of their upbringing, remain wild animals with instincts shaped by millions of years of evolution. That evening, as the cookout wound down, Trish offered her guests a tour they would never forget. 8 people followed her across the backyard to meet Rafi, who stood silently behind the mesh door, his dark eyes tracking their movement. What they witnessed next would shatter any illusions about the gentle nature of captive primates. Trish entered the enclosure carrying a crate of ripe peaches, Rafi's favorite treat. She attempted to demonstrate their communication through sign language, but Rafi remained unresponsive, a warning sign she chose to ignore. Then, in a moment of fatal overconfidence, she reached toward him to show his tactile trust. The primate took this differently. Adult male gorillas are 10 times stronger than humans, with 8-foot arm spans and the ability to lift over 4,000 pounds. Though not naturally aggressive, a single blow can shatter ribs, and their 1,300 psi bite can crush a skull instantly. In an instant, Rafi struck her across the chest with a single open-handed blow that sent her crashing to the floor. Before she could recover, he advanced, the dominant male asserting his authority. His 400-pound frame came down on her torso with crushing force, each step breaking ribs and collapsing organs. The horror escalated as Rafi grabbed Trish by the jaw, his massive hands easily encompassing her head. With one powerful bite, he removed part of her face, his canine teeth, designed to strip bark and crush tough vegetation, tearing through flesh and bone with terrifying efficiency. The guests fled in panic, their screams echoing across the suburban neighborhood as they witnessed the brutal reality of primate power. A neighbor that heard their screams dialed 911. When law enforcement arrived 12 minutes later, they found Rafi standing motionless over Trish's body. Not aggressive, but alert, displaying the calm dominance of a silverback who had successfully defended his territory. Unaware that a dangerous animal was present, they waited for another 10 minutes for animal control to arrive. Eventually, a tranquilizer dart ended the standoff, but it was far too late for Trish. Her skull was crushed, her upper torso torn open by the immense force of Rafi's attack. The scattered peaches around her body served as a grim reminder of the trust she had placed in a creature whose nature she had fundamentally misunderstood. Rafi was euthanized the following morning, a decision made without protest or petition. Trish's family declined interviews and only a small obituary appeared in the local paper, noting her background as an educator and longtime advocate for primate care. The investigation revealed multiple violations dating back years: incomplete behavior logs, improper enclosure procedures, and lack of veterinary oversight. The property was sold, the outbuilding demolished, leaving only bureaucratic footnotes to mark the end of Trish Boland's misguided dream. While Trish's misplaced faith in her companion would soon turn a backyard demonstration into a nightmare, thousands of miles away in the rugged landscape of Wyoming, a man's confidence in his bond with a lion was about to be shattered in the most brutal way imaginable. It was November 16, 2013, the Wyoming wind slicing across the plains near Cody, as a Barbary lion paced behind rusted bars in a half-acre of makeshift enclosures. Just past noon, Derek Pruitt stepped through the gate carrying a tray of raw venison, unaware that his years of reckless confidence were about to meet their violent end. Derek Pruitt was a 38-year-old former rodeo star whose fearless reputation on the bronc riding circuit had been built on calculated risk and split-second timing. When a career-ending injury forced his retirement, he channeled that same dangerous confidence into exotic animal ownership, converting old rodeo panels into enclosures on his property outside Cody. His centerpiece was Jax, a 500-pound Barbary lion he had acquired as a cub and raised to adulthood over 3 years. Barbary lions, Extinct in the wild but still bred in captivity are apex predators weighing up to 550 pounds, with 2-inch claws, a 650 psi bite, and hunting instincts that remain sharp even when hand-raised. As males mature, they grow more territorial, powerful, and dangerously unpredictable. Derek's approach to lion handling was built on dangerous misconceptions. His philosophy centered on dominance through calmness, believing that lions could sense human emotions and respond to confidence with submission. He regularly entered Jax's enclosure without protective barriers, hand-feeding the massive predator and walking the perimeter with nothing but a stick for protection. The warning signs had been mounting for weeks. Jax had been exhibiting classic stress behaviors, pacing at odd hours, refusing food for days, showing increased agitation during routine interactions. These behavioral changes are common in captive lions experiencing hormonal fluctuations or territorial stress, often preceding aggressive episodes. But Derek dismissed these red flags as winter laziness, his overconfidence blinding him to the danger signals that any trained animal behaviorist would have recognized immediately. On Thanksgiving weekend, his 14-year-old nephew Bryce had come by to help with feeding, as he often did. The enclosure's safety vestibule meant to protect direct contact was bypassed as always. Derek insisted Jax knew him too well to ever pose a threat. At 12:04 p.m., Derek entered the lion's pen carrying venison quarters. The lion lay still in the corner, watching. Derek called his usual greeting and turned his back to approach the feeding platform. That single act, turning away, was all it took. Without a sound, Jax rose and closed the distance in 2 strides. He struck with blinding speed, raking his forepaws across Derek's back and slamming him to the ground. Bryce screamed, frozen just outside the fence, as Jax clamped his jaws around Derek's neck and shook violently. The lion's bite, designed to crush windpipes and snap vertebrae, did exactly that. Derek kicked weakly for a few seconds, but Jax remained locked in, eyes fixed, unmoving. The animal's instincts had overtaken years of hand-rearing and familiarity. Bryce grabbed a metal rake and shouted, striking the bars. Jax didn't flinch. The 911 call came at 12:07 p.m. Bryce, voice shaking, told the dispatcher about the incident. When deputies arrived at 12:18, Jax was still hovering over Derek's mangled body. Officers fired a single shot, killing the lion instantly. Derek was pronounced dead on scene. His injuries matched a classic big cat takedown. Crushed cervical vertebrae, deep claw marks across his spine, and puncture wounds through the throat. The untouched tray of venison nearby made one thing clear: Jax hadn't attacked for food. He had responded to instinct, territorial, sudden, and final. A small funeral was held on the outskirts of Amarillo, attended by a few family members, 2 former rodeo friends, and a wildlife officer who had known Derek from inspection visits. There were no speeches, just silence, wind, and a closed casket. Bryce received trauma counseling, Derek's remaining animals were relocated, and the enclosure was dismantled within weeks. State officials quietly tightened exotic animal ownership regulations, closing the loopholes Derek had exploited. And as a lion claimed another victim in Wyoming who had mistaken familiarity for safety, the dense forest of California would soon witness a retired chef's final birthday celebration turn into a blood-soaked nightmare involving a black bear. It was May 22, 2016, light filtering through the pines above Oakhurst as guests gathered behind Mario DeLuca's cabin for cake and quiet celebration. No one noticed the massive black shape in the tree line, until Mario, spotting it with a grin, raised his phone and remarked that it would make a great photo, words that would be among his last. Mario was a 61-year-old retired chef who had traded the chaos of Modesto restaurant kitchens for what he called simple living close to nature on his wooded parcel near Yosemite. However, his dream of harmony with the wilderness had manifested in the most dangerous way possible, through his relationship with Bobo. a 400-pound black bear he had raised from a cub and allowed to roam freely around his property. Mario's approach to bear management was built on dangerous misconceptions that would prove fatal. He believed Bobo was practically vegetarian, feeding him fruit, bread, and even beer while allowing the massive predator to wander freely between his property and the surrounding wilderness. This habituation, the process by which wild animals lose their natural fear of humans, is one of the most dangerous scenarios in wildlife management. Habituated bears become unpredictable, viewing humans as sources of food rather than threats to avoid. Additionally, despite their seemingly docile reputation, black bears are incredibly powerful omnivores capable of running 30 miles per hour and climbing trees with ease. Their massive paws are equipped with claws up to 4 inches long, designed for tearing apart logs and digging through soil, but equally effective at shredding human flesh. An adult black bear possesses the strength to crush a human skull with a single swipe and can deliver a bite force of over 800 pounds per square inch, enough to crack bones like twigs. Wildlife officers have received multiple complaints about Bobo's presence near residential areas, but Mario's insistence that his bear was harmless had prevented any serious intervention. He regularly boasted to neighbors about their special bond, describing how Bobo would visit his porch and even accompany him to the mailbox. These interactions, which Mario saw as proof of their friendship, were actually warning signs of a wild animal that had lost its natural behavioral boundaries. On May 18th, Mario's birthday celebration seemed like the perfect opportunity to showcase his unique relationship with Bobo. As his 3 guests, an old co-worker, her sister, and a local handyman, enjoyed cake and conversation, the massive bear wandered into view with the casual confidence of an animal that had learned to associate humans with food rewards. Mario's decision to approach Bobo with a slice of birthday cake represented the culmination of years of dangerous conditioning. Bears are opportunistic feeders with an acute sense of smell that can detect food from miles away, and Mario's offering of sweet cake activated the same feeding response that drives bears to raid garbage cans and break into campsites. Only this time, the bear wasn't separated by a fence or fear. Bobo reared onto his hind legs before lashing out with one massive paw. The blow struck Mario across the face, sending him sprawling backward as his guests watched in frozen horror. Black bears killed through a combination of crushing bites and powerful claw strikes, using their incredible strength to overpower prey much larger than themselves. Bobo's jaws clamped down on Mario's leg, dragging him toward the tree line with the methodical efficiency of a predator securing its kill. The bear's subsequent attacks targeted Mario's abdomen and chest, tearing through flesh and bone. The 911 call came at 4:34 p.m. from a passerby who heard the screams echoing across the ridge. By the time deputies and wildlife officers arrived 30 minutes later, Mario was already dead, his body torn apart by the animal he had considered family. A single rifle shot ended both the attack and Bobo's life, but the damage was irreversible. Mario's torso had been torn open, his neck partially severed, his face rendered unrecognizable by the bear's powerful claws. The trail of blood and clothing fragments, stretching from the party table to the forest edge, told the story of his final, desperate moments. Mario's funeral was held 3 days later at a small crematorium in Mariposa. Only close family and a few former co-workers attended. In the days that followed, wildlife authorities conducted a formal investigation and issued a public advisory on the dangers of habituating wild animals. The bear's remains were tested and buried off-site, and the county announced plans to review and strengthen local exotic and nuisance wildlife enforcement protocols. Mario's story had ended in carnage among the California pines. Meanwhile, Kentucky would soon witness a mechanic's secret obsession with his hidden Bengal tiger transform a casual family visit into a feeding frenzy that would leave witnesses scarred for life. It was March 9, 2018, as a violent storm swept through southern Scottsville, wind rattling tin roofs and rain pooling in red clay yards. Behind a small house, a flashlight beam sliced through the dark toward a camouflage shed, where Kilo, a 350-pound Bengal tiger, waited silently as laughter from the garage faded into the storm. Within minutes, that laughter would transform into screams that would echo through the hollow. Elijah Brantley was a 29-year-old recluse whose journey from auto mechanic to exotic predator owner had been marked by increasing isolation and dangerous obsessions. Once employed at a small garage outside Bowling Green, he had slowly withdrawn from steady work after a back injury and a falling out with coworkers. Over the next 2 years, Elijah poured his time and dwindling money into a remote lifestyle, one where he could pursue what he called pure control. That mindset would take physical form in the shape of a steel-framed enclosure and a dangerous growing animal few in the area even knew existed. Elijah had constructed the enclosure in secret, a concrete-floored structure welded from scrap panels and wrapped in layers of camo tarps, brush, and plywood. Hidden behind a stand of cedars and positioned downhill from the house, it was all but invisible from the road and overlooked by local authorities. He had no exotic animal license, no fencing inspection, and no veterinary documentation for the tiger's health. The shed had no external signage, no perimeter fence, and no real emergency access. He fed Kilo raw meat, chicken quarters, ground beef, expired pork, obtained through bulk suppliers who likely never asked questions. Elijah believed that feeding the tiger regularly had earned him its trust. Sandy, Elijah's cousin, had once been close to him. She hadn't visited in over a year, but had reached out recently, concerned about his reclusive behavior and rumors from neighbors. That Friday night, she and her boyfriend Drew came to see him, under the pretense of a family check-in, though really it was part intervention, part curiosity. They sat in the garage drinking cheap beer while lightning cracked over the ridge. The metal roof shook with wind gusts and water pooled around the tires of Drew's truck. Around 9:15 p.m., after a lull in the storm, Elijah stood up with a grin and asked if they wanted to see something insane. His tone was casual and joking. Neither Sandy nor Drew realized the seriousness of what he meant. Elijah retrieved a flashlight, zipped up his jacket, and motioned for them to follow. They stepped outside into the mud and walked around the back of the house, their shoes slipping in puddles and wet leaves. The flashlight cut across trees and brush until the beam landed on a sagging tarp that covered what looked like a shed. Kilo was already awake and pacing, the sound of boots in the mud and voices in the dark alerting his predatory instincts. Bengal tigers are apex predators, solitary hunters capable of bringing down animals many times their own size. Males can weigh up to 660 pounds and measure over 10 feet from nose to tail. Their retractable claws can extend over 4 inches, and their bite force exceeds 1,000 pounds per square inch. In the wild, they ambush prey from cover, targeting the neck with a single powerful bite to sever the spinal cord and cause instant death. In captivity, those instincts remain intact, triggered by movement, scent, and opportunity. As Elijah stepped through the unlatched door of the enclosure, he crossed a line that had never truly existed in Kilo's mind. The tiger did not see a caretaker. It saw a moving shape inside its domain, presenting no visible threat. There was no warning growl, no pawing or hesitation. Kilo lunged from the side of the enclosure, his body hitting Elijah with crushing impact. Elijah landed hard on the concrete, his flashlight skittering out of reach. What happened next unfolded in seconds. Kilo's jaws locked onto Elijah's neck with devastating force, the bite crushing vertebrae and severing critical arteries. Sandy screamed. Drew grabbed a rusted crowbar from beside the shed and struck the cage bars, yelling. Kilo paid no attention. The tiger shook Elijah's body, dragging him toward the far end of the shed, where blood quickly pooled under his hind legs. Kilo began feeding, methodically, silently. He tore through fabric and flesh, exposing muscle and ribs. Sandy, panicked, ran back toward the house to get her phone, slipping twice in the mud. Drew remained outside the shed, shouting Elijah's name, unable to look away. Elijah was unresponsive within the first 30 seconds. He was likely dead within a minute. Sandy's 911 call was logged at 9:27 p.m. It took over 20 minutes for law enforcement and wildlife officials to reach the property, slowed by weather and poor road conditions. When officers arrived, Kilo was still crouched over Elijah's remains, showing signs of possession and guarding behavior, ears back, eyes fixed, tail rigid. One wildlife officer prepared a tranquilizer dart, while another took position behind the patrol vehicle. A single dart was fired and struck Kilo in the hindquarter. The tiger growled, backed away slowly, and collapsed under sedation within 3 minutes. The scene that investigators entered was gruesome. Elijah's face was torn beyond recognition. His neck was broken, and his chest cavity had been partially opened. Blood had seeped into the cracks on the concrete floor. Clothing, bone fragments, and shredded meat were scattered in a 6-foot radius. Elijah's funeral was held 5 days later at a private cemetery near Bowling Green. Only a small group of family attended. No obituary was published, and no formal service was conducted. His casket remained closed. The family declined interviews and asked that the details remain private. The tiger Kilo was transferred under sedation to a secure holding facility that night. After a brief observation period, he was relocated to a licensed big cat sanctuary in the western United States. Authorities opened an investigation into how Elijah had acquired and kept the animal, but found no records, receipts, or permits. Without clear violations involving commerce or transportation, no charges were filed posthumously. The shed was dismantled within a week. The land was quietly listed for sale by Elijah's estate. There was no local press coverage beyond an initial police blotter entry. State officials issued a public advisory about exotic animal ownership, but stopped short of passing new restrictions. It was April 2nd, 2014. The Nevada sun beat down on the dry outskirts of Pahrump, where prefab homes and rusted trailers line the dirt roads. One of them was a faded blue trailer on Elmsworth Drive, home to Carla Edmonds, a 52-year-old former veterinary technician who locals quietly referred to as the Lion Lady. Carla was a woman who believed she understood predators in ways others couldn't. Her neighbors often heard her talking to the massive creature behind her trailer in the same gentle tones she might use with a house cat. She had raised Zorro, a male African lion, from an 8-week-old cub after purchasing him from an unlicensed breeder with money from her father's inheritance. For 6 years, she documented every moment of his growth, photos of him in her lap as a cub, videos of bottle feeding, countless images of his magnificent mane as he matured into a 400-pound apex predator. What Carla failed to fully comprehend was the fundamental nature of the animal she called her baby. African lions, even those raised in captivity, retain every instinct honed by millions of years of evolution. A male lion's bite force exceeds 650 pounds per square inch, enough to crush bone instantly. Their retractable claws, over 2 inches long, are designed to grip and tear flesh from struggling prey. Most critically, lions are hardwired to respond to blood scent and movement with predatory aggression, regardless of their relationship with humans. Carla housed Zorro in a 1,500 square foot enclosure behind her trailer, reinforced with steel fencing that met minimum legal requirements, but lacked the double barrier safety system used by legitimate sanctuaries. Neighbors had grown accustomed to seeing her enter and exit the enclosure without protective equipment, relying solely on what she believed was an unbreakable bond of trust. That belief would prove tragically fatal. On April 2nd, Carla had been distracted all morning, fielding phone calls about a potential donation to help with Zorro's care. She had skipped lunch, focusing instead on preparing his afternoon meal, raw beef ribs that she cut by hand in her cramped kitchen. While working, she had nicked her finger on the knife blade, a small cut that bled freely but seemed insignificant enough to ignore. That nick on her finger, combined with a bowl of blood-slick meat, was all it took to turn a hungry predator into a killer. Lions possess an extraordinary sense of smell, capable of detecting blood from considerable distances. The scent triggers a predatory instinct that overrides training and any bond with humans. As the afternoon heat intensified, Zorro had begun his familiar pacing pattern, a sign of growing agitation and hunger that Carla had witnessed countless times before, his eyes tracking every movement in his vision. Standard feeding protocol at any legitimate facility would have required Carla to use the feeding chute or divider gate to separate Zorro before entering his space. Instead, she grabbed the metal bowl of blood-scented meat in one hand and a towel in the other, then unlatched the main enclosure door and stepped directly into the lion's territory. The moment Carla crossed the threshold, Zorro's demeanor shifted with terrifying speed. His pacing stopped abruptly as he locked onto the scent of fresh blood emanating from both her injured finger and the raw meat. His pupils widened, muscles tensed, and tail flicked, a clear warning Carla missed or misread. The attack was swift and devastating, with part of it captured by a security camera mounted on the opposite wall. Zorro's 400-pound frame launched forward with explosive force, closing the distance in a single bound. The impact as he slammed Carla against the steel fencing created a metallic crash that neighbors later described as sounding like a car accident. His massive jaws clamped around her neck with crushing force, likely piercing her carotid artery and collapsing her larynx instantly. Carla likely lost consciousness within seconds, her body going limp as the lion dragged her deeper into the dirt-floored enclosure. Mary Hill, a neighbor living 2 lots away, heard the initial impact but didn't recognize it as a sign of danger at first. She later told investigators she assumed Carla was moving equipment or yelling at the cat again, but when everything suddenly went quiet, she knew something was wrong. By the time sheriff's deputies and animal control officers arrived, nearly 20 minutes after Mary's frantic 911 call, Zorro was still circling Carla's motionless form. The lion's behavior had shifted into protective mode, guarding what his instincts now recognized as his kill. Officers initially attempted to drive him away using air horns and shouting, but Zorro refused to retreat from his prize. When the massive predator snapped aggressively toward an approaching officer, the decision was made to euthanize him on the spot. Multiple rifle shots were required to bring down the 400-pound lion, his body finally collapsing mere feet from Carla's remains. Carla Edmonds was pronounced dead at the scene, her body showing classic lion attack injuries. Later examination found older scars, healed bites and claw marks, evidence of earlier unreported close calls with Zorro. She likely dismissed these as accidents, never realizing they were early warnings that her bond had already begun to fracture. Her family, devastated by the tragedy and overwhelmed by media attention, chose to cremate her quietly and declined all interview requests. Local animal control officials used Carla's case as a centerpiece of a subsequent awareness campaign against unlicensed exotic pet ownership, highlighting the inherent dangers of keeping apex predators in residential settings. She thought a bond could override instinct. While 3 states away, a retired soldier stepped into a steel cage with a starving grizzly and the same fatal confidence. It was July 29, 2015. The California sun already beating down mercilessly on the rugged hills of Red Bluff, where Marcus Clay had carved out his solitary existence. The 58-year-old retired Army survival instructor stood at the edge of his property, surveying the half-acre steel-fenced enclosure that housed his most dangerous obsession, a 600-pound female grizzly bear named Masha. In the hours that followed, every lesson he thought he'd mastered would be ripped apart. Marcus had spent over 2 decades teaching soldiers how to survive in the world's most hostile environments. From the frozen tundra of Alaska to the scorching deserts of the Middle East, he had trained hundreds of military personnel in the art of staying alive when civilization fell away. His weathered hands bore the scars of countless wilderness encounters, and his steel-gray eyes reflected the confidence of someone who had faced death and emerged victorious time and again. After retirement, Marcus had retreated to his isolated patch of California wilderness, seeking the kind of solitude that only those who had seen too much of humanity's darker side could truly appreciate. But solitude wasn't enough for a man accustomed to adrenaline and danger. His fascination with apex predators had set the stage for a deadly miscalculation. Marcus never realized how lethal grizzlies are by design. Weighing up to 1,500 pounds and running over 35 miles per hour, they have 4-inch claws, a bite force strong enough to crush bone like an eggshell, and most critically, these bears possess an intelligence and unpredictability that makes them infinitely more dangerous than their size alone would suggest. Marcus had acquired Masha through the shadowy network of underground exotic animal dealers, purchasing her as a cub from a breeder who operated outside the reach of federal oversight. For 3 years, he had raised her in the steel-fenced enclosure he euphemistically called the yard, feeding her raw meat through a gated chute while maintaining what he believed was a respectful distance. The trouble started when a shipping error delayed Masha's food delivery. After 36 hours without eating, she grew visibly agitated, something Marcus noted in his journal but dismissed, writing that he'd calm her down himself. What Marcus ignored or didn't grasp is that a hungry grizzly is at its most dangerous, driven by instinct to get food at any cost. On the morning of July 29th, Marcus made the choice that would cost him his life. Instead of using the reinforced feeding gate, he grabbed a bag of scraps and entered through the main service door, previously writing that the chute felt too impersonal for what he saw as a bond. But some colleagues believe it was also about pride, a refusal to let a steel barrier mediate a connection he felt he had earned through control and consistency. The moment Marcus stepped into the enclosure, 3 years of relative docility evaporated in an instant as her predatory instincts took control. The scent of food combined with the stress of prolonged hunger triggered a response that Marcus's military training had never prepared him to handle. Masha charged with the devastating power that had made grizzlies the apex predators of the North American wilderness. Her massive frame covered the distance between them in seconds, her 600-pound body moving with surprising agility across the dirt floor of the enclosure. Marcus barely had time to register the attack before her powerful jaws clamped down on his left arm just above the elbow. The force of her bite shattered bone instantly, and she used her incredible strength to yank him off his feet, dragging him toward a shaded corner of the enclosure like a rag doll. There, following instincts as old as her species, she pinned him down with her massive paws and began the methodical mauling that would end his life. A motion-triggered security camera mounted on a nearby post captured bits of the attack, showing the initial charge and moments of the struggle before cutting out. In the chaos, Marcus's phone, still in his back pocket, accidentally initiated the call to a former military colleague. The 2-minute recording that followed later served as key evidence for investigators, capturing Marcus's screams, the bear's heavy breathing, and the violent clang of the fencing as the struggle reached its peak. Then, abruptly, silence. His colleague immediately dialed 911. When sheriff's deputies and wildlife officials arrived at the scene, they found the outer gate locked and Masha pacing restlessly beside a blood-streaked patch of grass where Marcus's body lay motionless. The bear showed no signs of retreating. Officers used fire hoses to distract the bear, then cut the padlock on the enclosure. Inside, they found Marcus's body torn open and partially buried under shredded clothing, with deep claw marks, massive torso trauma, and signs the bear had begun feeding before being interrupted. Marcus Clay was declared dead at the scene. Masha, following California state policy regarding fatal captive animal attacks, was euthanized within hours of the incident. Authorities discovered that he had received multiple cease and desist letters from animal welfare organizations regarding his unlicensed grizzly bear, all of which he ignored. Friends and former colleagues described Marcus as fearless, principled, and driven, but also increasingly isolated and dismissive of safety warnings. His military experience had given him confidence in dangerous situations, but it also created a dangerous blind spot regarding the fundamental unpredictability of wild animals. In the aftermath of his death, local wildlife officials used Marcus's case to highlight the inherent dangers of keeping apex predators in private settings. His property was eventually sold and cleared, the steel enclosure dismantled and hauled away. After a soldier misjudged the limits of a starving grizzly, a teenager in rural Oklahoma made an even deadlier mistake. He forgot to lock the gate on a full-grown tiger. It was October 18, 2016, and the mist hung low over the wooded hills near Broken Bow, Oklahoma. Deep within the sprawling property owned by the Dunn family, a converted barn stall held the secret that would soon turn deadly. Inside, a 300-pound Bengal tiger named Rozzy paced behind makeshift barriers, watching every move of the young man who had raised him. While other teenagers in rural Oklahoma spent their Friday nights at football games and weekend bonfires, 21-year-old Caleb Dunn immersed himself in the shadowy world of exotic animal ownership. He spent countless hours watching big cat rescue videos and following illegal exotic pet forums, fascinated by people who claimed to have formed bonds with apex predators that defied conventional wisdom. When Caleb turned 18, a modest inheritance from family land sales provided him with the means to pursue his dangerous obsession. He contacted an unlicensed breeder in Texas who promised him a docile, hand-fed Bengal tiger cub that would be perfect for bonding. The seller assured Caleb that the animal would remain manageable and affectionate if raised properly from infancy. However, Caleb failed to understand the fundamental nature of the predator he was purchasing. Bengal tigers are among the strongest big cats, with males weighing over 500 pounds and capable of taking down much larger prey. Their 4-inch claws and 1,000 psi bite can crush bone with ease. Crucially, even hand-raised tigers retain their instincts and may be more dangerous due to their lack of fear of humans. Caleb named the cub Rozzy and hid him in a converted stall at the edge of his grandparents' barn. Only 2 friends knew, sworn to secrecy, as Caleb shared plans to start a donation-based roadside attraction like ones he'd studied in rural Alabama and Missouri. His grandparents, both in their 70s, believed he was raising goats and had no idea a tiger was living in their barn. But tigers don't remain cubs forever, and by fall 2016, Rozzy had transformed into a magnificent and terrifying predator. At over 300 pounds, he had grown restless and powerful, his muscular frame barely contained by the makeshift enclosure Caleb had constructed from scavenged materials. The stall was reinforced with a patchwork of old fencing, kennel panels, and plywood. The enclosure's deadly flaw was its primitive security system, a chain-locked outer gate and a wooden inner divider that Caleb had to manually lift and secure each time he entered. This design required him to be inside the tiger's space while manipulating the barrier, a risky method no professional facility would allow. On the morning of October 18th, Caleb entered the stall to refill Rozzy's water barrel, a task he had done many times before. The security camera he had recently installed to monitor the enclosure captured footage that would later serve as key evidence for investigators. As he lifted the inner gate to pass the water barrel through, he became distracted by his phone, apparently attempting to capture a photo of Rozzy. In his momentary lapse of attention, he forgot to drop the lock bolt back into place, leaving the barrier unsecured. Rozzy, with the intelligence and opportunism that have made tigers apex predators for millions of years, immediately recognized the opening. He slipped through the divide, effectively cornering Caleb inside the confined space of the stall. The attack was swift and decisive. Tigers are ambush predators, evolved to kill large prey quickly and efficiently to minimize their own risk of injury. Rozzy struck low and fast, knocking Caleb off balance with a single swipe that tore through his thigh. As Caleb hit the ground, the tiger clamped down on his neck, crushing his airway and severing critical blood vessels in seconds. His arms flailed briefly before going limp. In the wild, tigers typically kill by delivering a crushing bite to the throat or back of the neck, severing the spinal cord or crushing the windpipe. This technique, perfected over countless generations, ensures a quick kill that prevents the prey from fighting back or escaping. Hours later, Caleb's friend Tyler arrived for the afternoon feeding to an unsettling silence. The stall door was ajar, and inside he found Caleb's body partially buried in straw, torn by deep claw marks and massive trauma. Rozzy paced calmly inside, likely satisfied with the kill. Tyler immediately called 911. When authorities arrived after an hour, they found themselves facing a scenario that highlighted the dangerous reality of illegal exotic animal ownership. Wildlife officials tranquilized Rozzy and transported him to a legitimate sanctuary in Colorado, where staff described the tiger as well-fed but completely unsocialized, a dangerous combination that made him unsuitable for any form of human interaction. Caleb's grandparents, visibly shaken and devastated by the revelation of what had been happening on their property, insisted they had no knowledge of the tiger's presence. Caleb's funeral was held quietly in Broken Bow, attended by a small group of friends and family still reeling from the shock. His grandparents, overwhelmed with guilt and grief, chose not to speak publicly again about what happened. After one teenager's secret tiger turned a routine feeding into a fatal mauling in his makeshift barn pen, hundreds of miles away, a middle-aged woman's unlicensed primate sanctuary would become her tomb. It was March 3, 2013, with rain clouds hanging over the outskirts of Macon, Georgia. Inside a small ranch-style home on Peachtree Lane, 67-year-old Laura Estes moved through rooms crowded with cages, perches, and the strong odor of animals soaked into the walls. Neighbors described her as quiet and stubborn, traits that had kept her committed to rescuing strays, but also set the stage for what would kill her. Laura's journey into exotic animal ownership had begun innocently enough. Throughout her life, she had rescued cats, dogs, and even the occasional raccoon, nursing them back to health in her spare bedroom before finding them proper homes. But as she aged and grew more isolated, her rescue efforts had taken a darker turn. By 2013, her home had become an unlicensed menagerie housing several primates, including her most prized possession, Toby, an 11-year-old male chimpanzee she had raised from infancy. Laura had acquired Toby as an infant through the shadowy network of exotic animal dealers, bottle feeding him in her living room and treating him like the child she had never had. For over a decade, she believed her bond with Toby overrode natural instincts. She called him gentle and misunderstood, ignoring his 130-pound size and past aggressive behavior. But adult male chimpanzees are among the most dangerous animals on Earth, possessing strength that can exceed 5 times that of an adult human. Their muscular arms, designed for swinging through forest canopies, can generate crushing force capable of tearing limbs from their sockets. Most critically, chimpanzees are highly intelligent and emotionally volatile creatures whose behavior can shift from docile to violently aggressive in seconds, often triggered by seemingly minor provocations. The warning signs had been accumulating for years. Neighbors regularly complained about the noise, the screaming, chattering, and occasional shriek at night. Friends who visited rarely came back, uneasy about the chaos and clear danger. Toby had already shattered a reinforced screen door during a storm, his panic-driven strength breaking through with ease. But Laura stayed convinced they shared a deep bond, insisting to others that Toby loved her and that their connection was something most wouldn't understand. That connection proved tragically one-sided. On the morning of March 3rd, the drumming of rain against the windows had begun to agitate Toby in his reinforced kennel. which Laura had welded into the corner of a converted guest room. The confined space, barely adequate for such a large and intelligent animal, had become a source of increasing stress as Toby matured. Wild chimpanzees roam large territories and engage in complex behaviors that captivity can't replicate. As the rain worsened, Toby grew frantic, screaming and slamming the bars of his cage so hard the noise filled the house. Exhausted and overwhelmed, Laura finally reached her limit. Against her usual routine, Laura decided to release Toby from his kennel earlier than scheduled, hoping that freedom to move around the house would calm his agitation. The moment she opened the door, Toby stormed out with pent-up energy of a creature that had been confined too long in too small a space. In his agitated state, Toby immediately began engaging in destructive behavior, a common response among captive primates experiencing stress. Her home security camera captured him grabbing a plastic shampoo bottle from a side table and began chewing on the cap, his powerful jaws easily crushing the plastic. When Laura attempted to remove the bottle from his grasp, she made the deadly mistake of treating him like a misbehaving child rather than a powerful wild animal. Chimpanzees are highly possessive creatures, and any attempt to forcibly remove an object they've claimed can trigger aggression. In that moment, Toby's perception of her shifted from caregiver to threat. The attack was swift and devastating. Toby slammed her against the doorframe with such force that the impact could be heard throughout the house. His powerful jaws clamped down on her left arm, his canine teeth easily severing tendons and crushing bone. Laura's screams filled the house as she stumbled backward, but Toby was far from finished. Following the attack patterns that chimpanzees use against rivals in the wild, he continued his assault with methodical brutality, biting, striking, and tearing at her face and scalp. He pulled clumps of hair from her head while his teeth inflicted devastating wounds to her arms and neck. In the chaos of the attack, Toby knocked over a table lamp, sending shards of glass across the floor. The crash, combined with Laura's increasingly desperate screams, finally attracted the attention of a neighbor who was walking her dog past the house. The woman immediately called 911. When police officers arrived minutes later, they peered through the living room window to see Toby pacing near Laura's motionless body on the floor. As officers entered through the rear of the house, Toby charged with the same explosive aggression he had shown toward Laura. Faced with a 130-pound primate in full attack mode, one officer fired twice. Toby collapsed in the hallway, just feet from the door, his body finally still after a lifetime of captivity. Laura Estes was pronounced dead at the scene, her body bearing the horrific injuries typical of a chimpanzee attack. Multiple facial lacerations, partial scalping, and deep bite wounds to her arms and neck. The coroner ruled her death as trauma consistent with prolonged mauling. The surviving primates in Laura's makeshift sanctuary, 2 capuchins and 2 macaques, were sedated and removed by animal control officers. After a legal battle with distant relatives who wanted them euthanized, all were eventually rehomed to accredited sanctuaries where they could receive proper care. Laura's funeral was held quietly at a small church in Macon, attended by a few neighbors and former co-workers. Her remains were cremated and no family members spoke publicly. Just as one woman's belief that her captive chimpanzee loved her ended in a glass-shattering nightmare, 4 years later in Florida, a veteran snake collector's decision to handle his 13-foot king cobra barehanded proved even more delusional. It was June 22, 2017. The Florida humidity hung heavy as the sun rose over suburban Gainesville. Inside a converted 2-car garage on Maple Street, Brent Lively moved methodically through his morning routine, surrounded by the carefully controlled environment he had created for some of the world's most dangerous reptiles. Brent was a 34-year-old who had earned legendary status in Florida's exotic reptile community, not just for his extensive collection, but for his brazen handling methods that made seasoned herpetologists cringe. His social media accounts were filled with videos of him free-handling venomous snakes, delivering impromptu educational lectures, while timber rattlesnakes coiled inches from his bare feet. His followers numbered about 3,000. Drawn to his charismatic confidence and apparent fearlessness around creatures that could kill with a single bite, Brent held a Class II permit for venomous reptiles, which legally allowed him to maintain his collection, but he was notorious throughout the community for bypassing basic safety protocols. While other handlers used hooks, tubes, and protective equipment, Brent preferred direct contact, believing his experience and intuition provided better protection than mechanical barriers. His garage was a high-end serpentarium with climate-controlled enclosures and labeled racks holding snakes from around the world. Its most dangerous resident was Krishna, a 13-foot king cobra from Thailand, strong, alert, and notoriously unpredictable. King cobras are not true cobras but belong to their own genus, Ophiophagus, which literally means snake eater. They are the world's longest venomous snakes, capable of growing over 18 feet in length and possess a level of intelligence that sets them apart from other serpents. Unlike many venomous species that strike and retreat, king cobras are aggressive defenders of their territory, capable of sustained attacks and multiple envenomations. On the morning of June 22nd, Brent began his routine cage maintenance, a process that required relocating Krishna to a freshly cleaned glass enclosure. Standard protocol uses a hook to guide the snake into a secure tube before transfer, minimizing contact and reducing strike risk. But Brent had always prided himself on his unconventional methods. Instead of using proper equipment, he reached directly into Krishna's enclosure, intending to lift the massive cobra by grasping it just behind the head, a technique he had demonstrated countless times in his social media videos. This time, however, Krishna was not in the cooperative mood. The king cobra, sensing the approaching hand as a threat to its territory, recoiled with lightning speed and struck Brent's wrist with surgical precision. The bite occurred just above his glove line, where a gap in his minimal protective gear left bare skin exposed. The half-inch fangs injected neurotoxic venom directly into Brent's bloodstream. Unlike tissue-destroying venoms, king cobra venom shuts down the nervous system by blocking signals between nerves and muscles. Surveillance footage later reviewed by authorities captured Brent's reaction with chilling clarity. Rather than panic or immediately seek professional medical help, he grimaced briefly, then walked calmly to his back room where he kept emergency supplies. Brent grabbed a vial of Thai anti-venom meant for king cobras, and without training or proper tools, tried to inject it himself. Anti-venom requires precise dosing and monitoring, even in hospitals. Brent's attempt was not only ineffective, but risked severe allergic reactions that could worsen the envenomation. As the venom took hold, Brent sat in his chair, vision blurring and fingers falling from paralysis. He tried to send a final message, but it was never completed. 3 weeks later, a FedEx driver making his regular delivery noticed packages piling up by Brent's front door, an unusual sight for someone who regularly received reptile supplies and equipment. A strong, unpleasant odor emanating from the house prompted the driver to contact authorities. Brent's funeral was held quietly by a small circle of family members who had long distanced themselves from his snake-keeping lifestyle. His remains were cremated and no formal obituary was published. Following the incident, Florida Fish and Wildlife officials conducted a full inspection of the property and revoked Brent's venomous reptile license. The case prompted legislative proposals to tighten private ownership regulations for high-risk exotic species.
Thanks for watching. Want to watch more? Click on your screen now.